World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, engulfing continents and drawing nations into a struggle for survival. The world is on fire and two unlikely allies, America and the Soviet Union, find themselves fighting side by side, united by a single urgent goal: to defeat Nazi Germany. The US, capitalist, democratic and fiercely protective of individual freedom, stood as a beacon of hope for many. The USSR, communist, centrally planned and focused on the power of the collective, represented a radically different vision for society. They were never friends, and their ideologies clashed at every turn. But Hitler's threat was so great it forced them together, forging an uneasy partnership out of necessity. American factories roared to life, sending tanks, trucks, and vital supplies across the Atlantic to the Soviets through the Lend-Lease program. Meanwhile, the Red Army fought ferociously, bearing the brunt of the Nazi onslaught on the Eastern Front, losing millions but never backing down. Together they launched massive offensives from both east and west, squeezing the Axis powers in a relentless pincer movement. In 1945, American and Soviet troops finally met at the Elbe River, a moment of celebration and relief, symbolizing the collapse of Hitler's regime. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as if this partnership might endure, as soldiers from both sides embraced and celebrated their hard-won victory. But beneath the smiles and handshakes, deep disagreements and suspicions simmered, never truly going away. At Yalta and Potsdam, the Big Three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, debated fiercely over the fate of post-war Europe, each with their own vision for the future. They agreed on defeating Germany, but when it came to rebuilding, especially in Eastern Europe, their differences became impossible to ignore. The alliance was always fragile, held together by the urgent need to survive, not by trust or shared values. As the war ended and Europe lay in ruins, the cracks between the Allies widened and old suspicions quickly resurfaced. The glue that held them together was dissolving. In the ashes of victory, a new and chilling conflict was already beginning to take shape: the Cold War. Why couldn't the US and USSR get along? Their worldviews were polar opposites. America stood for capitalism, private property, free markets, individual rights. The Soviet Union believed in communism, state ownership, central planning, collective equality. Each side saw the other as a threat to humanity's future. Americans viewed communism as oppressive and dangerous. Soviets saw capitalism as exploitative and unjust. This wasn't just politics, it was a moral crusade. Both believed their system was destined to prevail. The result? Deep, mutual distrust. Each side was convinced the other had to be contained. The Cold War wasn't just a rivalry, it was a battle for the soul of the world, and neither side was willing to back down. After the devastation of World War II, Europe faced a new uncertainty. The big question loomed: what would become of Eastern Europe, now liberated from Nazi control, but left in ruins and chaos? The Soviet Red Army, which had played a crucial role in defeating Hitler, remained stationed across Eastern Europe. Instead of withdrawing, they solidified their presence, transforming these war-torn nations into communist satellite states under Moscow's watchful eye. For Joseph Stalin, this was about more than just influence. He demanded a buffer zone, a protective barrier of friendly governments, to shield the USSR from any future invasions from the West, a fear rooted in Russia's painful history. Through a combination of rigged elections, political intimidation, and outright force, Moscow installed loyal communist regimes in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and beyond. Local opposition was crushed, and dissent silenced. The hope for genuine democracy and free elections in Eastern Europe faded almost overnight. Parliaments were shuttered, and the voices of the people were stifled. In 1946, Winston Churchill famously described this new reality as the descent of an iron curtain, a sharp, impenetrable divide between East and West that split the continent both physically and ideologically. On one side stood the capitalist democracies of Western Europe, rebuilt with American aid and led by the United States, promising freedom and prosperity. On the other side, Soviet-controlled communist states, where the government dictated nearly every aspect of life, and the people lived under constant surveillance and suspicion. Travel, trade, and even simple communication across this divide became nearly impossible. Families were separated, economies split, and suspicion grew on both sides. In the United States, these moves were seen as clear acts of Soviet aggression and betrayal of wartime promises, fueling fear and anger among the public and policymakers alike. The American response was the policy of containment, an effort to stop the spread of communism without triggering another world war. This meant supporting allies, forming NATO, and drawing clear lines in the sand. This strategy would shape U.S. foreign policy for decades, from the Civil War in Greece to the jungles of Vietnam. As the world's superpowers vied for influence across the globe, the lines were drawn, and the stakes were higher than ever. Europe was now split in two, divided not just by borders but by ideology, fear, and suspicion. The scars of this division would last for generations. The Cold War had officially begun, a conflict not of armies but of ideas, propaganda, and proxy wars fought in distant lands. The world would never be the same. The shadow of the Cold War would touch every corner of the globe, shaping history for the rest of the century. After World War II, Europe was split in two, East and West, each side wary of the other, both scrambling to secure their interests. As tensions mounted, both blocs began to forge powerful military alliances, hoping to deter any aggression and protect their way of life. In 1949, the United States and its Western allies established NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This alliance was built on a simple but powerful promise: an attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all. It was a shield, meant to reassure Western Europe and send a clear warning to the East. Not to be outdone, the Soviet Union responded in 1955 by creating the Warsaw Pact. This pact united the Eastern Bloc countries under Moscow's strict control, binding them together in a military alliance that mirrored NATO's strength and purpose. Europe was now divided by more than just ideology. It became two heavily armed camps, bristling with soldiers, tanks, and artillery, each side watching the other with suspicion and fear. But the true game-changer was the atomic bomb. Its awesome power redefined warfare and raised the stakes to unimaginable heights. The United States had the bomb first, using it to end World War II. But in 1949, the Soviets shocked the world by detonating their own atomic weapon, ending America's monopoly on nuclear power. Suddenly, both superpowers possessed the ability to destroy not just each other, but the entire planet. The world entered a new era, one where the threat of total annihilation loomed over every decision. This terrifying balance became known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. If one side launched its nuclear arsenal, the other would retaliate, ensuring that both would be obliterated in the process. It was a grim logic that kept both sides in check. The nuclear arms race accelerated. Both sides built vast arsenals, bombers ready to fly at a moment's notice, intercontinental missiles hidden in silos, and submarines prowling the oceans, all armed with nuclear warheads. Governments poured billions into defense, and ordinary people lived with constant anxiety. Schoolchildren practiced duck-and-cover drills, crouching under desks in case of attack. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards, hoping to survive the unthinkable. News headlines screamed of the nuclear threat. People watched test explosions with a mix of awe and dread, while public warning posters reminded everyone that disaster could strike at any moment. The Cold War had become a high-stakes standoff, with the shadow of the mushroom cloud looming over every negotiation and crisis. Every move was fraught with danger. Leaders and diplomats lived in suspense, knowing that a single miscalculation could trigger catastrophe. No one dared to blink, for fear of what might follow. The world teetered on the edge, held in check by the balance of terror. It was a fragile peace, one maintained not by trust, but by the ever-present threat of mutual destruction. The Cold War wasn't just fought on Earth, it reached for the stars. The space race became a battle for technological and ideological supremacy. The Soviets struck first with Sputnik in 1957, shocking the world. America scrambled to catch up, pouring money into science and creating NASA. The Soviets kept winning firsts: first animal, first man, first woman in space. But in 1961, JFK set a bold goal: land a man on the moon before the decade's end. The Apollo program became a national obsession. In 1969, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, a triumph for the US and the West. The space race was about more than rockets. It was about proving which system could lead humanity's future. In the end, the US claimed victory on the lunar surface, but the rivalry was far from over. The Cold War had simply found new frontiers. On Earth, the Cold War nearly turned hot. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Soviet missiles in Cuba, US blockades, and 13 days of terror. Kennedy and Khrushchev negotiated a tense stand-down. Disaster was narrowly averted. A hotline was installed to prevent future misunderstandings. Berlin was another flashpoint, a divided city, a symbol of freedom and oppression. In 1961, the Berlin Wall went up, splitting families and ideologies. The wall became the ultimate symbol of Cold War division. Brinkmanship, pushing to the edge, defined the era. The world held its breath, hoping leaders would pull back in time. Sometimes, they did. Direct war was unthinkable, so the superpowers fought by proxy. They backed opposing sides in conflicts around the globe: Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and beyond. The Korean War ended in stalemate, dividing the peninsula. Vietnam became a costly quagmire for the US, ending in defeat. The Soviets faced their own disaster in Afghanistan. In Africa and Central America, local wars became Cold War battlegrounds. Weapons, money, and ideology flowed in from both sides. For the superpowers, these were chess moves. For the people caught in the middle, the suffering was real. The Cold War's battles were fought everywhere but home. The world was the board, everyone else, the pieces. The cost was staggering. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was crumbling, its economy was failing, shelves were empty, and the arms race was bankrupting the country. Mikhail Gorbachev took power in 1985, trying to save the system with reforms: glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. But once people tasted freedom, they wanted more. In 1989, communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapsed. The Berlin Wall fell, and crowds celebrated as the symbol of division was torn down. The dominoes fell quickly. One by one, Soviet satellites broke free. Inside the USSR, republics demanded independence. A failed coup in 1991 sealed the fate of the Soviet Union. By year's end, the USSR dissolved. Gorbachev resigned, and the red flag came down. After 45 years, the Cold War was over. The world watched as a superpower vanished almost overnight. The era of nuclear standoffs and Iron Curtains had ended. But the story wasn't finished. The Cold War ended, but its legacy lingers. The US emerged as the sole superpower. Russia struggled through the 1990s. For a while it seemed the rivalry was over, but old suspicions never fully disappeared. Today, echoes of the Cold War shape US-Russia relations. The battlefield has shifted: cyber warfare, propaganda, and regional influence. NATO expanded eastward, fueling Russian resentment. Russia seeks to reclaim its status, feeling encircled by the West. The ideological battle is gone, but geopolitical competition remains. The Cold War shaped borders, alliances, and nuclear arsenals that still exist. Understanding this history is key to understanding today's tensions. The Cold War's shadow is long, its story is far from over.